The Mediterranean takes a back seat when most think about the naval aspect of the First World War. That's a shame because the Mediterranean was a very interesting and important theater for both sides. Above the waves, ships from Austria-Hungary and the Entente faced off against each other. While under the sea, submarines prowled, sinking ships on both sides. For the Entente, keeping Austria-Hungary's main fleet inside the Adriatic was a priority. However, the German effort, supported by Austria-Hungary in sinking shipping, also presented a serious threat throughout the war. When war broke out in 1914, Austria-Hungary had a surface fleet of around roughly 50 ships, and a large number of torpedo boats, along with 5 submarines, just slightly smaller than their supposed allies in the Italian fleet. Due to Italy's neutrality, however, the Austro-Hungarian Navy found itself mostly limited in its ability for offensive action to the Adriatic. Nonetheless, a large number of Entente ships were tied down dealing with the Austro-Hungarians' navy, and that did not change with Italy's entry into the war on the inside of the Entente. Throughout the war, a number of skirmishes would take place, with both sides losing ships, but no decisive battle would occur as neither side was willing to risk their surface fleet. During the war, the Navy would also conduct a number of shore bombardments against Italy and Montenegro, disrupting communications, ports, and infrastructure. The original 5 submarines of the Austro-Hungarian Navy proved unsuitable for major actions outside of the Adriatic, but throughout the war, an additional 21 submarines would be added to the Austro-Hungarian fleet, mostly coming from Germany in one form or another. With the additional submarines and their greater capabilities, patrols could be undertaken much further into the Mediterranean, sinking much larger numbers of merchant ships and forcing the Entente to devote more resources to the fight there. Though the Austro-Hungarian Navy did not have any large battles at sea, it played an important role in keeping British, French, and Italian ships from fighting elsewhere. Its submarines helped the Germans cause chaos in Entente supply lines, and as a whole, the Navy played an important role in the war. It's a shame that most people forget that Austria-Hungary even had a navy. During the early stages of the war, Germany was not very concerned with the Mediterranean. For them, the main fight would take place against Britain much closer to home. As time went by, however, and it became clear that Germany would not gain naval dominance, the focus switched to submarine warfare and the Mediterranean grew in importance. The choke points at the Suez Canal and the Strait of Gibraltar meant that shipping carrying vital supplies to Britain or other members of the Entente were more concentrated. It was a theater that was very important for trade for France, Italy, and the British as supplies from their many colonies passed through it. Warmer weather in the Mediterranean also meant that U-boats could operate during the winter more effectively than further north around Britain. German U-boat numbers gradually increased as the war went on and had a large impact on overall tonnage of shipping sunk in the Mediterranean. In 1916, half the tonnage of shipping sunk came from U-boat activities in the Mediterranean, making a key theater if the Central Powers hoped to severely hinder Entente supply lines and choke out the British. By the end of the war, over 1,000 ships would be sunk, with over 3 million tons of shipping sinking to the bottom of the Mediterranean during the conflict. In contrast, less than 15 German U-boats were sunk. The decision to send U-boats to the Mediterranean helped relieve some pressure off the Austro-Hungarian Navy, in addition to forcing more resources be dedicated to fighting in the Mediterranean theater instead of farther north around Britain. For the Entente, the Mediterranean was a critical theater of the war as well, both when it came to maintaining supply lines, but also to help keep up pressure in the fight against the Ottoman Empire and Austria-Hungary. Unfortunately, there was a need for ships everywhere during the war, and so the Mediterranean did not receive as much attention as some other theaters. Whereas the British composed most of the force facing the main German fleet, the Mediterranean was to be dealt with primarily by the French when the war began. Italian entry to the war provided a massive boost to the Entente efforts in the Mediterranean, but did not solve the issues present in the theater. Efforts to trap the Central Powers in the Adriatic with a blockade were mostly successful when it came to Austro-Hungarian surface fleet, but proved to be completely ineffective against submarines. The blockade required a large number of ships to maintain and was under constant threat from raids by both submarines and the Austro-Hungarian surface fleet. Every ship used to maintain the blockade was also one less to protect shipping from Austro-Hungarian and German U-boat attacks. For most of the war, U-boats were able to inflict huge losses on Allied shipping while losing very small numbers of vessels in comparison. It was not until 1918 that losses to U-boats finally were reduced drastically, with the more widespread introduction of the convoy system. Part of the delay in implementing convoys in sufficient numbers was due to the fact that so many escort ships were tied up in the blockade of the Adriatic. Throughout the war, the Entente mostly controlled the Mediterranean, but that control was constantly tested by both the Austro-Hungarian fleet and frequent raids by U-boats on shipping. If the Entente did not keep up the pressure with substantial dedication of resources, the Central Powers could have caused even more problems in the Mediterranean than they already did. Both sides put significant resources into the fight for the Mediterranean, and it's an area of World War I history that's more interesting than many might first think. I would highly encourage anyone interested in this part of World War I history to do some digging into the subject on their own. It's really fascinating.